Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. And if you enjoy the fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Tsunade neglected Naruto after death of her son Minato and daughter-in-law part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Wah, wah. A newborn baby wailed as it laid in a small crib on top of the desk inside of the Hokage's office. It had been about 1 hour since the nine-tailed fox was defeated by the fourth Hokage and sealed inside a newborn baby whose umbilical cord was just cut, saving the lives of the remaining villagers of the Hidden Leaf village, but in turn, losing his own life in the process. The very same newborn baby was currently screaming his heart out from inside of his crib on the Hokage's desk while wrapped warmly in a blanket. Sitting behind the desk smoking a pipe was Hiruzen Sarutobi, third Hokage. He was staring at the baby with a sympathetic look on his face, knowing the burden the young child now carries. Off to the side of the office, sitting on the only couch in the room, was the former student of the third Hokage and godfather to the crying baby, Jiraiya the Toad Sage. "Quite the pair of lungs this one has," Jiraiya commented as he stood up and walked over to the crying baby. "You get that from your mother for sure," he added, causing the age-old Hokage to chuckle in agreement as he began to remember how loud and hyperactive Kushina was as a child, while at the same time how quiet and easy-going Minato was. Jiraiya picked up the baby and began rocking him in his arms in hope of comforting the baby. Sadly, it did not help. The baby continued to cry. "I think you are scaring young Naruto more than anything," the third Hokage said with a chuckle, causing Jiraiya's head to drop. Jiraiya was about to give a reply about how much kids love him, but before he could open his mouth to say anything, the doors of the Hokage's office burst open, nearly blowing the doors off their hinges. "Sarutobi-sensei," yelled out the only female student that the third Hokage had and teammate to Jiraiya, Tsunade Senju. "Where is Minato and Kushina?" she asked as she stormed into the office with a small girl no older than 16 following behind her. "I went to the hospital to see if they were there to treat their wounds, but I couldn't find them," she stated as she marched straight towards her sensei, completely ignoring Jiraiya and the crying baby's presence. "Have a seat, Tsunade," the Hokage said as he placed his pipe down and stared at his student with a sympathetic look on his face. Seeing the look on her sensei's face told Tsunade everything she needed to know. It was a look she had seen far too many times. "Minato and Kushina sacrificed themselves to seal the Nine Tails away," the Hokage said, causing the little girl that was with Tsunade to gasp in shock as she heard what the Hokage said. "I'm sorry, Tsunade," he added as he reached over the table and squeezed his student's hand, trying to comfort her. "First it was grandfather, then granduncle, then Dan and Nawaki, and now my son and daughter-in-law," Tsunade said as tears streamed out of her eyes. "Maybe I am cursed," she added between sobs. "Come now, Suna," Jiraiya said, still trying to comfort Naruto. "I can't comfort both you and the baby at the same time," she said, getting her attention. "Baby," Tsunade said in a confused voice as she turned to the Toad Sage. Upon seeing a head full of blonde hair and 3 whisker marks on each cheek, she sprang to her feet and shouted, "Naruto!" she yelled out as she took the baby from Jiraiya and began rocking him in her arms. "What did you do to my grandson, you old pervert?" she said angrily, causing Jiraiya's gape at her like a fish. "Shish, there, Grandma's here," Tsunade said in a soothing tone as she rocked Naruto in her arms. To the surprise of the two men in the room, the baby slowly began to stop crying until he was perfectly quiet in his grandmother's arms, staring up at her with a pair of cerulean blue eyes. "How did you do that?" Jiraiya asked as he looked over Tsunade's shoulder down at the baby. "He was screaming when he was with me," he added. "Must have been your face," Tsunade said with a chuckle, causing her sensei and the little girl with her to chuckle at the expense of Jiraiya. Hearing everyone around him chuckle, little Naruto gave out a cute giggle as he looked up at his grandmother. Hearing everyone, even his own godson, laughing at him, Jiraiya went over the corner of the room to sulk. Tsunade sat back down on the chair in front of the desk as she continued to stare lovingly at the baby. "He looks like big brother Minato," the little girl said, causing everyone in the room to nod in agreement. "You're right, Shizune," Tsunade said as she turned from her student to look at her grandson. "But he has Kushina's face," she added. "Tsunade," the third Hokage said, getting her attention. "There is something I have to tell you about Naruto," he said, causing her to look back down at the baby. Before the third Hokage could speak again, Tsunade spoke up. "The nine tails is sealed inside of him, isn't it?" she asked, causing Shizune's eyes to widen in shock. "Yes, it is," the Hokage replied as he nodded her head. "How did you know?" he asked, causing Tsunade to chuckle with a sad look on her face. "I know my son very well," she said as she fought back tears. He would never ask someone else to give up their child to be condemned to the life of a Jinchuriki. "It is something he would only do to his own child," she said, causing both Jiraiya and Hiruzen to nod their heads, both knowing the kind of man Minato was. "Tsunade, I have to ask," the former Hokage suddenly said in a serious voice. "You were there when Kushina gave birth. How did the nine tails break the seal?" he asked, causing Tsunade to growl in anger as she recalls the memory of Naruto's birth. "Everything was going fine," she said as she began stroking Naruto's hair. "Naruto came out and I handed him to Lady Bawako to clean him up before I turned my attention back to Kushina. It was then a masked man showed up," she said, causing both Jiraiya and Hiruzen's eyes to narrow. "He took Naruto hostage and undid the seal on Kushina," she said with another growl. "I couldn't see his face, but there is one thing I know for sure. He was an Uchiha," she said, surprising everyone. "Are you sure?" Jiraiya asked as he stood up and walked over to the window. "If he isn't one of the Uchiha, he has a Sharingan," she said as she turned and looked at her old teammate. "It always was rumored that the Sharingan had the power to control the nine tails," said the third Hokage. "Madara was said to be the only Uchiha to have the power to control the fox, but if there is now another," he said as she trailed off and looked at Naruto. "Then that means he may come after Naruto next," Jiraiya said seriously as he looked at his godson. "I dare someone to try and touch a hair on my grandson's head," Tsunade said in a dangerous tone as she hugged Naruto tighter while Shizune stood closer to her teacher as she too took up a protective stance over the baby. "For now, let us just make sure Naruto not only grows up safe but also ensuring that he has a normal or as close to normal life as possible," the Hokage earning a nod from everyone. "So, who is going to be Hokage now?" Jiraiya suddenly asked. "Well, I kind of hoping one of you will take the hat," he said as he looked at his two former students with a hopeful look on his face. "Not happening," Jiraiya and Tsunade said simultaneously, causing the age-old Hokage to sigh. "I guess I will have to take up the mantle again," he said as he looked at his two students. "Danzo will probably try to use this to his advantage to become Hokage," he added as he began thinking about his old teammate. "He is probably going to want to take Naruto as well," he said, causing both Tsunade and Jiraiya to narrow their eyes. "I plan on taking Naruto out of the village," Tsunade suddenly said, surprising everyone. "He won't be safe here with Danzo and his route always looming around, and not to mention that masked Uchiha could very well be inside the village. I don't plan on just sitting around here waiting for one of them to strike," she said as she looked down at Naruto, apparently found the adult conversation boring and fell asleep. "Are sure that is wise?" the Hokage asked as he looked at his student. "It was Minato's dying wish that Naruto is seen as a hero by the village," he said, recalling Minato's last words to him. "You and I both know that is not going to happen," Tsunade said as she looked up at her former sensei. He is now a Jinchuriki, and we all know Jinchurikis are always hated by everyone in their respected villages. They are treated as though they are the demons themselves, and I refuse to have my grandson go through life being hated and shunned everywhere he goes," she said strongly. "I am going to make sure he has a life where he is loved and cherished. I am sure his parents would have rather that over something as trivial as being seen as a hero," she added, causing Jiraiya to smile while the Hokage to sigh. "Where are you going to take him then?" he asked, causing Tsunade to think about a second before she replied. "I won't tell you right now," she said seriously, surprising the old Hokage. "The fewer people that know about where Naruto will be, the better. I will send you a message of where we are by one of Katsuyu's summons, cause this room isn't exactly secure right now," she said as she looked around the room. Hiruzen nodded his head, understanding the precautions that Tsunade was taking. "If there is nothing else, Sensei," Tsunade said before she stood up. "Shizune and I need to get our stuff together for our journey," she said before she began making her way out of the room with Naruto in her arms and Shizune following closely behind, leaving the two men behind in the room. After they left the room, the third Hokage turned to Jiraiya and spoke. "Jiraiya," he said, getting the Toad Sage's attention. "We suffered a major loss in this attack, and other villages may try to use this to their advantage to launch an all-out invasion while we are weak. I want you to use your spy network to not only find out about any potential threats to the village, but also want you to use it to spread misinformation to other villages when it relates to our current strength. Make them think we didn't suffer that much of a loss and we are still as strong as ever," he said in a commanding tone. "Understood, Sensei," Jiraiya said with a salute before he hopped out of the open window in the office. The old Hokage took a deep sigh before he stood up and stood by the window looking out of the village. As he looked out, he saw destruction everywhere. Ninjas were running all over the village trying to get the wounded treated and help anyone in need of their help. Even though he was seeing nothing by chaos at the moment, he had lived long enough to know that the village will bounce back from this tragedy. Just then an Anbu dropped down to the floor behind him and spoke. "Lord Third," the Anbu said while kneeling down on the ground. "The council has been called," the Anbu said. "So, it begins," the Hokage thought to himself before he nods the Anbu and began making his way to the council chambers. With Tsunade and Shizune had taken Naruto over to the Senju clan compound. Tsunade had created a few shadow clones and ordered them to start packing both her and Shizune's stuff. While the clones were packing everything up, Tsunade and Shizune currently had Naruto laying on the sofa while they were standing around him staring at him as he slept with smiles on both of their faces. "He's so cute," Shizune said, causing her sensei to chuckle. "Go make sure the clones are packing all of your stuff. As soon as they are done, we are leaving," she said to her student, causing her to be a little surprised. "Are we leaving so soon?" she asked. "Yeah, I rather we leave under all this chaos, that way we can slip with Naruto without anyone noticing anything," she said, causing Shizune to understand. "Understood, Lady Tsunade," she said before she left the living room to make sure all of her stuff was ready. It took about an hour to get everything packed. Once packed, Tsunade and Shizune wrapped Naruto up in a nice warm blanket before they exited the Senju compound, with Tsunade activating the security seals around the compound as they exited. Once outside, she took one last look at the compound before she shut the gates and activate the final seal main gate, which prevented anyone who was not of Senju blood from entering the compound. With the compound sealed, the two Kunoichi and baby dashed towards the main gate. Due to the chaos all around them, they managed to leave the village without anyone really seeing them. For those that did catch a glimpse of them, it was not enough to properly identify them or notice that they were carrying a baby. As they made it out of the village with no trouble, they began heading north. "Where are we going, Lady Tsunade?" Shizune asked as they were running through the trees. Without looking over at her student, Tsunade replied, "The fire capital, she said, surprising her student. They traveled for 2 days, making a few stops to feed and change Naruto along the way. They were extremely lucky that Minato and Kushina had bought a lot of baby supplies in advance. That saved them trouble to going to buy everything, and considering the state that the village was currently, she doubted that they would have been able to find any baby food or diapers. Thankfully, that was not the case, and they could have continued their journey to the fire capital without taking any detours. Naruto for the most part was a good baby the entire journey there. He would only cry when hungry or when he needed to be changed, otherwise, he did not make a sound. Tsunade had chalked it up to him being too caught up admiring the scenery around them. Tsunade and Shizune stopped at the entrance to the capital admiring the scenery of all the rather large and expensive-looking buildings. The capital was where the extremely rich people in the Land of Fire lived, well, those except for the clans of the Leaf Village. "Come on, Shizune," Tsunade said before she began walking towards the entrance. "Right, Lady Tsunade," Shizune replied before following her teacher. Standing at the entrance of the capital were 2 samurai in black and white armor guarding the entrance. When they got closer, the 2 samurais stopped them. "Halt," called out of the samurais as he placed his hand on his katana strapped to his hip. "Do you have permission to enter the capital?" he said in a strong voice. "I don't need permission," Tsunade replied in an equally strong voice. "I am Tsunade Senju," she said as she flared her chakra slightly, causing the 2 guards to gasp in shock and unconsciously take a step back. "Forgive us, Lady Tsunade," one of them said. "We did not know," the other said before they let the group pass through the entrance. After that little setback, they continued their journey into the capital. "Do you have a house in the capital, Lady Tsunade?" Shizune asked as she looked at her teacher with a curious look on her face. "No, but I know someone who can help us find one," she replied as they continued to walk through the capital. They walked for another 10 minutes until they came upon what could only be described as a palace. Just like the entrance of the capital, there were samurai guards all over the palace. They were stopped in front of the palace by 4 guards. "Halt. State your business," one of the guards commanded. "I am here to see the Fire Lord," Tsunade said, causing Shizune's eyes to widen slightly. "That's who she knows," Shizune screamed in her head. "As the Fire Lord expecting you?" the guard asked, to which Tsunade shook her head, said no. "Then I am afraid I am going to have to ask you to leave," he added as he waved them off, causing Tsunade to narrow her eyes. "Just go tell the Fire Lord that Tsunade Senju is here to see him," she said to guard, once again earning a gasp from all 4 of them. "Of course, Lady Tsunade," the samurai replied before he headed into the palace, leaving the other 3 behind. It was one of the perks of being a Senju. Thanks to her grandfather and granduncle and herself, the name was practically royalty in the Land of Fire, and in some cases even outside the Land of Fire. Tsunade, Shizune, and Naruto waited for about 5 minutes before the same guard running back outside. "The Fire Lord will see you now, Lady Tsunade," he said before he began escorting the group into the palace. Shizune could not help but admire the sheer size of the palace. It was by far the biggest house she had ever seen. She doubted whether there was anything this size in the Leaf Village. They were led into a large room which had a rather large cushion in the middle with 2 smaller ones in front of it. Sitting on the large cushion with the Fire Lord himself, and all around the room were 12 shinobis standing on guard. These were the Guardian Shinobi 12, their sole job is to protect the Fire Lord. "Tsunade, long time no see," the Fire Lord said as he greeted Tsunade with a warm smile on his face. "How have you been?" he asked as he motioned them to sit down on the cushions in front of them, while at the same time taking note of the baby in Tsunade's arms. "I have been better," Tsunade replied before glanced at the 12 shinobis around the room. The Fire Lord got the message and turned his personal guards. "Leave us," he ordered as he waved his hand signaling them to leave the room. After they all left, the Fire Lord looked back at Tsunade and spoke. I just received word of what transpired in the leaf, he said as he let out a sigh. Yes, it is most unfortunate, but they will rebuild stronger than they were before, they always do, she replied, causing the Fire Lord to nod his head in agreement. If you don't mind me asking, Tsunade, the Fire Lord said as he turned his attention to the baby in Tsunade's arms. Who is this baby? He asked, causing Tsunade to smile before she held up Naruto. This is Naruto, my grandson, she said, causing the man's eyes to widen beyond belief. Grandson? He asked, causing her to nod. I didn't even know you have a child, much less a grandchild, he said, causing Tsunade to chuckle. I had a son when he was born. We changed his name because it was around the time where the other villages would send assassins to kill anyone with the Senju name, and if he took his father's name it would have been easily linked by to me, she said, causing him to nod his head, understanding his precautions. But you have met my son before, she said, surprising him while at the same time confusing him. I have, he asked with a confused look on his face. He was the Fire Lord. The people who he meets are all pretty powerful and high-ranking. So, he cannot help but wonder just who Tsunade's son is. He looks a lot like his father, she said as she held up Naruto for the Fire Lord to see. His blonde hair and blue eyes are exactly like his father's, she said, causing the Fire Lord to stare at the baby for a few minutes before he realized who the baby looks like. You're right, he does look like his father, he said with a chuckle. He then realized something else which caused him to take on a more somber look before he spoke again. Tsunade, I am truly sorry for your loss, he said, causing a sad look to appear on both Tsunade and Shizune's faces. Thank you, she said in a soft tone. I had to leave the village immediately because I didn't want anyone to find out about Naruto, and as a result, I will miss their funerals, she said. It had pained her to leave just like that and not say her final goodbyes to Minato and Kushina, but Naruto's safety took priority over her grief. You traveled a long way to see me, Tsunade, the Fire Lord said, changing the subject. I imagine it must be for a reason, he said, causing her to nod. I was hoping if it is not too much trouble you could help me find a suitable place to buy here in the capital, she said while looking at the Fire Lord. Money is not an issue. I just want a place on the outskirts of the capital first to live with a big enough space for me to train Shizune and Naruto when he is old enough, she added, causing the Fire Lord to think for a bit. I am asking you mainly because you would be able to speed up the process of me acquiring the house, she said. Why don't you just live here? The Fire Lord suggested, causing Tsunade's eyes to widen in shock. She had never expected the Fire Lord to give her such an offer. I am extremely grateful for the offer, my lord, but when training I tend to cause a lot of damage to the surrounding area and we are currently in the middle of the capital, Tsunade said, causing the Fire Lord to nod his head in agreement, knowing very well about Tsunade's superhuman strength. Very well, Tsunade, he said with a smile. Have it your way. I will have my assistant find you a suitable compound, but until then I insist you stay in the palace, he said, causing her to smile. Very well, sir, she agreed, knowing very well that the man will not let it go. However, sir, I must ask that you keep my presence here a secret. Not even the Hokage knows where I am, he said, surprising the man. You didn't tell Sarutobi where you would be? He asked in a surprised voice. I told him I was going to leave and will send him a message through a more secured way of communicating of my exact location once I am settled, she said, causing him to nod once again, understanding the precautions she is taking. What of young Naruto here? He said as he looked down at the baby. Will you be changing his name as well? He asked. For now, it will just be Naruto, she said with a smile. When he is older, I will let him decide on what he wants his last name to be, she said, causing Fire Lord to raise an eyebrow at her. Why not change his name as you did with his father? He asked. It is widely believed that I am the last Senju alive. Even if someone comes along claiming to be a Senju, I doubt anyone would take it seriously unless that someone is coming out of the Leaf Village, she said as she handed Naruto over to Shizune for a bit. Back then with his father, I wasn't the only one left. There still a few members in the clan, so precautions needed to be taken, but right now everyone believes that with the exception of me all other Senjus are dead, she said, even though she was still slightly worried. Well then, that does make sense, but please do be careful, he said, causing her to smile. Let us head up to the residence and get you all settled in. My wife would probably kill me if I had you here and didn't bring you to see her, he said with a chuckle as they all stood up. They then walked to the door and pushed it open to see the same 12 shinobis standing outside the door guarding it. Without saying anything, the Fire Lord began walking towards the living quarters of the palace with Tsunade and Shizune, who were carrying Naruto, following behind him. 2 days later, Tsunade, Shizune, and Naruto had been starting in the palace of the Fire Lord for 2 days now. It had been a peaceful 2 days, to say the least. In the past 2 days, she got to spend a good amount of time with Naruto. It really helped her take her mind off Minato and Kushina. Shizune for the most was really in love with Naruto. He was like her little brother. She had always wanted to be a big sister and now she is one. In the past 2 days, she was having a ball playing with Naruto. She found him absolutely adorable. After they had spoken 2 days ago, the Fire Lord had asked his assistant to look for a compound on the outskirts of the capital for Tsunade, and today they received word that they found one that fits her specifications. Tsunade had to admit that it was rather fast, but she guessed that is one of the perks of being the Fire Lord. Without hesitating, she gave the assistant the money necessary to purchase the property. By the end of the day, the transaction was complete. Tsunade wanted to set out right away for the house because she wanted Naruto to experience some level of normalcy instead of always moving around like they were doing, but the Fire Lord insisted that they spend one more night and he would have a carriage take them to the house in the morning. Tsunade eventually agreed and spent one more night in the palace. The Hidden Leaf Village. Sitting behind his desk with a tower of paperwork in front of him was the third Hokage. He had taken up back the position of Hokage. It has been 4 days since the Nine Tails attack. The rebuilding efforts in the village had already begun, with everyone from Jonins to everyday civilians helping out in the rebuilding efforts. They held a mass funeral yesterday for all those lost in the attack while also burying the fourth Hokage and his wife as well. He had been slightly upset when he found out Tsunade had left without saying goodbye, but he understood she was only thinking about Naruto. Speaking of Naruto, he made no mention of Naruto being the Jinchuriki to neither the public nor the council. Thinking about the council meeting causes him to smirk at the reaction of his old teammate. Flashback. Council meeting. The council room was divided into 2 sections, the shinobi sections consisting of the clan heads, and the civilian section consisting of a few rich civilians. They all sat in a straight line on either side of the room with the Hokage seated at the head of both lines. Sitting behind the Hokage were his 2 advisors who were also 2 of his former teammates. What of the Jinchuriki, Hiruzen? Asked Danzo as he spoke from the shinobi side of the room. That is none of your concern, Danzo, the Hokage replied with a sigh. And it is Lord Hokage when we are in this room. He added strongly. Of course, Lord Hokage, Danzo said, sounding as though it pained him to utter his words. But I just wish to know who the Jinchuriki is so they could be trained into the perfect weapon for the village, he said, causing the Hokage and a few of the clan heads to scowl at him. I just said it is none of your concern, Hiruzen said forcefully while at the same time flaring his chakra as well, making everyone in the room sweat a little while some of the civilians were ready to pass out. Next order of business, he added as he pulled his chakra back in. Flashback end. There was not a shadow of a doubt in the old Hokage's mind that it would not be the last time he would have to deal with Danzo concerning the whereabouts of Naruto. But no matter how much his old teammate pushes, he would not jeopardize Naruto's safety. He owed that much to Minato and Kushina after the sacrifice they made for the safety of the village. He could only hope Tsunade is able to keep Naruto safe and ensures he has a normal childhood wherever they are. The next day with Tsunade. As the Fire Lord had requested, Tsunade, Shizune, and Naruto stayed an additional night in the palace. Now that it was morning, they were ready to leave. The Fire Lord had provided them a carriage to take them to their new home instead of having them walk all the way to the outskirts of the capital. The two kunoichis and baby who was currently in Tsunade's arms were standing in front of the palace entrance with a horse-drawn carriage behind them. Standing in front of Tsunade and Shizune were the Fire Lord and his wife, Madame Shijimi. They were there to see the group off. The Fire Lord had wanted to personally escort them to their new house, however, Tsunade told him that would only draw more attention to them. "Thank you for your kind hostility, sir," Tsunade said as both Shizune and she gave a slight bow. "Think nothing of it, dear," the Fire Lord said with a wave of his hand. "You all are welcomed in my home at any time," he said with a warm smile. "Yes, and do try not to be a stranger, Tsunade girl," Madame Shijimi said while holding a cat in her arms. "We won't," Tsunade replied with a smile. The two kunoichis then turned around and entered the carriage with baby Naruto in tow. The carriage ride was peaceful and gave Shizune the opportunity to see more of the capital. At this time of the day, the capital was abuzz with people doing their early morning shopping. The thing that Shizune found incredibly interesting was the fact that everyone was wearing somewhat expensive clothes and jewelry in her opinion. It was as though everyone was going to a formal event with the way they were dressed, but Shizune soon came to realize that this was just the way things were in the capital. As the carriage drove by, people would often stop and point it due to the fact that the carriage had the Fire Lord's symbol on either side of it. The carriage ride took 15 minutes before it came to a stop in front of a rather large compound with 3 houses inside of it. "We are here, Lady Tsunade," the driver said as he opened the carriage door. As they exited the carriage, the two kunoichis saw that they were in front of a small compound with 3 houses surrounded by a concrete wall about 10 feet high. "Thank you for bringing us here," Tsunade said as she turned away from the compound and looked at the driver. The driver gave a small bow before he got back onto the carriage and drove off. Tsunade and Shizune walked up to the gate and unlocked it with the keys that she got from the Fire Lord's assistant. As they entered the compound, they could not help but admire the beauty of everything. There were 3 houses in the compound. The one in the center was bigger, the other 2 signifying it as the main house, while the other 2 were guest houses. Around the entire property were perfectly cut grass and a cobblestone walkway leading from the main gate to the 3 houses. Lining the walls around the property was a bed of flowers that seemed to go all the way around the compound. Deciding to check out the interior of the house, Tsunade began walking towards the main house with Shizune following behind with Naruto in her arms. As they entered the house, they were surprised to see that it was fully furnished. Tsunade had thought that they would have to buy all the furniture they would need, but it seems as though the Fire Lord had an additional reason for making them stay an extra night in the palace. "My, quite the house this is," came a male voice from behind the duo, causing the two kunoichis to panic slightly. Tsunade immediately went into attack mode and spun around, getting ready to deal with their sudden intruder. Upon turning around to face the intruder, Tsunade came face to face with her old teammate Jiraiya standing in behind them with a stupid grin on his face. "Jiraiya!" Tsunade shouted in anger, causing the Toad Sage to grin wider. "Miss me, Tsuna?" he asked while grinning. "In your dreams, you stupid pervert," Tsunade replied as she relaxed a bit. "How the hell did you find us?" she asked as they all walked into the house. "I had my spies everywhere looking out for you," he said as they walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. It wasn't until 3 days ago that I got word of someone matching both you and Shizune's description spotted in the capital, he said as he took Naruto from Shizune and held him in his arms. I got here yesterday and heard that you entered the Fire Lord's palace, he said while making funny faces for Naruto, who was giggling away at his godfather's antics. At first I thought you were going to be living there, but then this morning I saw you get in the carriage, so I followed it and ended up here, he added as he turned and grinned at her. Tsunade sighed and leaned back into the couch. Hopefully, no one else knows I'm here, she said with a sigh. Don't worry, I'm already spreading rumors of you being spotted in the lighting country, Jiraiya said, causing Tsunade to smirk. Jiraiya then pulled out a storage scroll from his robe and put some chakra into it, resulting in a puff of smoke appearing from the scroll. When the smoke dissipated, Jiraiya was holding a small stuffed orange toad in his hand. He began moving it around in front of Naruto, causing baby Naruto to giggle and began reaching up for the toad. You like your gift, don't you? Jiraiya said as he handed the stuffed animal to Naruto, who immediately hugged it tightly. Jiraiya then handed Naruto back to Shizune before he stood up and spoke. I'm going to go place some security seals around the compound, he said, causing Tsunade to nod her head. Thanks, Jiraiya, she said with a smile. If you really want to thank me, then maybe you could, he began before he broke out in a perverted giggle while staring at Tsunade's rather large, causing the medical ninja's eyebrow to twitch in annoyance. Jiraiya, Tsunade growled out before he sprung up from the couch and began chasing Jiraiya. Shizune just shook her head as she held onto Naruto. Well, Naruto, I guess this is our new home from now on, she said as she too got up from the couch with Naruto in tow, preparing to explore the house. Time skip. 5 years. It has been 5 years since the Nine Tails attack on the Hidden Leaf Village and 5 years since Tsunade, Shizune, and Naruto had started living in the capital. Naruto was now 5 years old and quite the handful. Tsunade did not know where the boy got all that energy from. It was like he was running on an infinite supply of entry that never runs out. Ever since he learned how to crawl, you could not leave him alone for a second, or else when you get back you will notice he vanished. It nearly gave his grandmother and his big sister a heart attack the first time it happened. They were changing him on Tsunade's bed when they turned around for a second to grab a new diaper. When they turned back, Naruto was no longer on the bed. Instead, he was on the floor trying to make a break for the opened door. That habit of his only got worse when he learned how to walk. At that point, there was no stopping him. The only thing that Naruto would sit still for was ramen. It drove Tsunade crazy how the boy seemed to have inherited his mother's love for ramen. The past 5 years had been incredibly peaceful for the trio, well as peaceful as it could get with Naruto around. Nothing too interesting happened in the last 5 years. Even though they have been living in the capital for 5 years, they rarely ever left the compound. When they do leave, it is always under a disguise, mainly the transformation jutsu. In the case of Naruto, who had yet to unlock his chakra, they would normally have him wear a hat to his spiky blonde hair and some makeup on his face to hide the whisker marks. Naruto did not really care about the makeup, he was simply happy to be able to go outside. Even though there was no incident in the past 5 years with anyone recognizing them, Tsunade did not want to take any chance when it came to Naruto, so she always made sure they were in disguises. As mischievous as he would always listen to his grandmother and big sister no matter what. So, when they told him to never go outside without them, he listened. Over the years, the Fire Lord's wife, Madame Shijimi, would come by the compound to visit regularly, and sometimes Tsunade would even take Naruto to the palace with her when she goes to visit the Fire Lord. Naruto always enjoyed when Madame Shijimi would come to visit because that would mean that he would get to play with her pet cat, Tora. The cat likes to run around and so does Naruto. By the end of her visit, Tora would be so tired that she would just collapse into either Naruto or Madame Shijimi's arms. Currently, Naruto was sitting at the dining room table with a history book in front of him. Tsunade and Shizune started teaching Naruto how to read at the age of 3, and by the time he turned 4 he was able to read all on his own. Now that he is 5, his level of reading only increased to a point where they could give him more advanced reading materials like the history book he was reading. While Naruto doing his reading, which is something Tsunade made sure he did every day, Tsunade was in the kitchen fixing lunch and Shizune was in the backyard training. Naruto then closed his book before carefully climbing down from the chair, which was too high up for him to begin with. He then took his book and ran upstairs to put it in his room before coming back down carrying some of his toys. He was wearing an orange t-shirt with the Senju clan symbol on the front with a pair of short blue pants. "Grandma, can I go play in the backyard?" came the voice of a young Naruto as he walked into the kitchen and looked up at his grandma. Tsunade turned and looked at him to see him carrying training kunai and shurikens as well as the orange stuffed toad that Jiraiya had given him. "Did you finish your reading?" Tsunade asked sternly while looking at him. "Yes, I read 2 full chapters," he said as he held up 2 of his little fingers forming the peace sign. "Very well," she said, causing him to grin and run out through the back door in the kitchen. "Thank you, Grandma," Naruto shouted as he ran out the back door. At first, Naruto used to call both Tsunade and Shizune mommy, but when he was 3 Tsunade told him that she was his grandmother and Shizune was more like his big sister. Since then, he started calling her grandma and Shizune big sis. She did not explain to him that his parents were dead until a year ago when he began asking why his mom and dad do not come to visit. It was a painful conversation, but it was one that they were going to have at some point. She also told him who his mother was, but she did not tell him who his father was as yet. She was planning to do that when they tell him about the 9 tails sealed inside of him. She wanted to tell him sooner rather than later to allow him to grow up with this knowledge so that he could better prepare himself for the life ahead of him. Right now, she was just waiting for her old teammate Jiraiya to show up to be here when she tells him. The old pervert would usually stop by once every couple of months, sometimes even a few times a month when he was not busy. She was also waiting for him to arrive so that they could unlock Naruto's chakra so that she could begin his training. She wanted him present in case the 9 tails decide to try and break out. Letting out a sigh, she just shook her head and watched her grandson in the backyard from through the kitchen window. The backyard of the compound was rather large and ideal for training. There were 2 large trees in the backyard, one on either side of the yard. Under the tree to the right was a small koi pond that Naruto loves to play around. When he arrived outside, he saw his big sister training over to the left. She was throwing some rather big needles at the training dummy. There were 2 training dummies in the backyard, one tied to either tree. With his big sister using the on the left, Naruto decided to go to the other one so that he does not disturb her. Naruto sat all of his equipment down beside the koi pond before he picked up the orange stuffed toad and sat it down on one of the rocks around the pond and spoke to it. "Froggy, you stay here and watch," he said to the stuffed animal as he placed it down on the rock and turned it to face the training dummy, that way it gets a good view. Shizune looked over and saw what her little brother was doing and could not help but smile. Naruto then grabbed his training shurikens and stood about 10 feet away from the training dummy. He placed 5 of the 10 shurikens down on the ground and held the other 5 in his hand. Then one at a time he would throw them at the dummy. Of the first 5 that he threw, only 2 hit the target that was on the dummy, but they were nowhere close to the center. As for the other 3, they did not hit the dummy at all. 2 flew past on either side of the dummy because one embedded itself into the tree. Naruto pouted cutely when he saw only 2 of his shurikens hit the target. When he would watch his big sister and mother train, They would always hit the center every time they threw it. He wanted to be as good as they were. Would you like me to help you with your shuriken training, Naruto? Shizune asked as she walked over to her little brother, getting his attention. Naruto looked down at the ground for a bit before he nodded his head shyly, causing Shizune to ruffle his hair. She then proceeded to show Naruto how to properly hold a shuriken and how to properly throw it. There, now you try throwing it again, she said as she stood behind him. Okay, Naruto said with a determined look on his face before he held one of the shurikens the way his sister showed him. He then focused on the target painted on the training dummy before he flicked his wrists just like Shizune showed him. The shuriken hit the target but once again was not close to the center. Not giving up, Naruto picked up the remaining 4 shurikens and began throwing them at the dummy. This time they all hit the target but only one managed to hit the bullseye. Good job, Naruto, Shizune said as she ruffled his hair once again. If you keep practicing, you're going to be hitting the center every time, she said, causing him to grin up at her. Just you wait, I'm going to surpass you and Grandma in no time, he said with a wide grin on his face. As that's so, came the voice of Tsunade from behind the two of them, getting their attention. Believe it, he shouted while flashing his grandmother a wide grin. I'm going to be the strongest ninja that ever lived, he said while grinning. Well, until then, Tsunade said as she scooped him up in her arms. You are still my little Naruto, she said before she started tickling him, causing him to giggle. Okay, time for lunch. You can play with your kunai and shurikens after, she said as she began walking back towards the house. Wait, Naruto yelled, surprising the two women. I can't leave Froggy, he said while pointing to his little stuffed toad still sitting on the rock. Shizune smiled and walked over the rock and picked up the small stuffed animal and took it to Naruto. Here you go, Naruto, she said as she handed the toad to him. Thank you, Naruto said as he hugged the toad tightly, causing the two women to smile before they walked inside the house and sat Naruto down at the dining room table before heading to the kitchen to grab the food. Can I have ramen? He asked while looking at the two women in the kitchen. You already had ramen this week, his grandmother replied, causing his head to drop slightly in disappointment. Tsunade would only allow Naruto to eat ramen once a week. On the remaining days, she would ensure he had a healthy, balanced diet. Shizune and Tsunade took all the food to the dining room table and set it up while Shizune placed a little bit of everything in front of Naruto so he could reach it easily before sitting down beside him, with her sensei sitting down across from her. As they were about to start eating, the voice of a man coming from the entrance of the dining room surprised everyone. Oh, lunch, the man said, getting all of their attention. When they turned to look, they saw Jiraiya standing there with a grin on his face. Jiraiya, pervy sage, Tsunade and Naruto said simultaneously. How many times have I told you not to call me that, brat? Jiraiya said as he sat down beside Shizune while Naruto just grinned at him. Naruto had started calling him pervy sage after hearing his grandmother call him a pervert and hearing Jiraiya referring to himself as the Great Toad Sage. Combing the two, Naruto came up with pervy sage, much to the amusement of his big sister and grandmother and the annoyance of Jiraiya. Did you bring me anything? Naruto asked with an excited look on his face. Jiraiya just reached into his robe and pulled out a green wallet in the shape of a frog and tossed it at Naruto, who caught it and smiled. Look, Froggy, you have a friend, Naruto said as he placed the green wallet next to his stuffed toad. The adults at the table could not help but smile at the boy's antics. So, where are you coming from, Jiraiya? Tsunade asked as he looked over at her old teammate while putting some rice in her bowl. I just paid Sarutobi-sensei a visit, he said as he took an empty bowl that was on the table and started taking food. Reported to him about the happenings around the elemental nations, he said before he took a bite of his food. Anything interesting happening? Tsunade asked. The Hidden Mist village is now in a full-blown civil war, Jiraiya replied. Tsunade was not really surprised by this, she had expected it to happen a long time ago. Orochimaru was in the Lightning Country doing God knows what, he added, causing a scowl to appear on Tsunade's face at the mention of their other teammate. Up to no good, I'm sure, she said lowly, causing Jiraiya to nod in agreement. Naruto was quietly eating while at the same time listening to his grandmother and godfather's conversation. Any word on the masked Uchiha? She suddenly asked, causing him to shake his head no. For the past 5 years, whenever Jiraiya would come to visit, she would ask if he heard anything about him, but he never did hear anything about the man. Speaking of the Uchiha, Jiraiya suddenly said, some of my spies from inside the Leaf Village are telling me that the grand population of the village is starting to suspect the Uchiha clan for the attack, he said, surprising Tsunade. That's surprising, she replied as she looked at her teammate. I know for sure that Sensei wouldn't go spreading what I told him about that night to the grand public, she said. You're right, Jiraiya replied with a nod. It is likely someone from the shadows spreading rumors to start a conflict, he said, causing Tsunade to growl once more. I wonder who would do such a thing, she said sarcastically, causing Jiraiya to chuckle slightly. Speaking of which, I think it's time, she said as she looked at Jiraiya. Time? He asked with a confused look on his face. Time for what? He asked. First to talk to Naruto about you know what, she said, causing his eyes to widen slightly while getting Naruto's attention as well. Are you sure? He asked, thinking that it was slightly too soon. Yeah, I rather him knowing now so he can properly prepare himself, she said, causing him to nod his head, understanding her train of thought. Tell me what? Naruto asked while looking at his grandmother and godfather with a confused look on his face. Come with me, Naruto, Tsunade said as she got up from the table and lifted him up before heading over to the living room. Jiraiya and Shizune soon followed behind the two. Tsunade sat down on the couch and placed Naruto on her lap. Shizune then sat down to the right of her sensei while Jiraiya chose to remain standing. What is it you want to tell me? Naruto asked while looking at his grandmother with a slightly worried look on his face. I'm going to tell you about your dad and what happened to him, she responded with a soft smile. My dad? Naruto asked with a surprised look on his face. Whenever he had asked about his dad, his grandmother always told him that she will tell him when he was older. All he knew about his dad was that he looked like him and the fact that he died the night the giant fox attacked the Leaf Village along with his mom. Yes, your dad, Tsunade replied with a smile. Your dad was a shinobi in the Hidden Leaf Village. In your history books, do you remember reading about the Hokages? She asked, causing him to think for a second. Yeah, he answered with a nod before continuing. Grandma's grandpa was the first Hokage, her granduncle was the second Hokage, and her sensei is the third Hokage, he asked while holding up 3 fingers. Then there was the fourth Hokage, he was the coolest of them all. He beat up the giant fox and saved everyone, Naruto said enthusiastically, causing the adults to chuckle. Yes, that's right, she said as she ruffled his hair slightly. Well, you see Naruto, your father's name was Minato Namikaze, and he was the fourth Hokage, she said, dropping a bomb on poor little Naruto who had his mouth hung open. My dad is the fourth Hokage? Naruto asked in a startled voice. That's so cool, Naruto yelled out with a big grin, causing Tsunade to shake her head at her grandson's antics. Sometimes he behaves like his father, but other times he is like his mother. But how come his last name is Namikaze and not Senju? Naruto suddenly asked. Well, you see, when your father was born, Grandma changed his last name to protect him, she explained, causing him to put his index finger to his chin and started to think. The adults around him found it absolutely cute. So, what is my last name then? He asked while looking at his grandma, causing her to smile. You get to choose if you want to be Namikaze or Senju, she said, causing him to ponder upon it for a few seconds before he gave his reply. I am going to be Naruto Senju, he yelled out with a wide smile on his face. It is the coolest, he added with a proud grin on his face before he started bouncing up and down on his grandmother's lap excitedly. Okay brat, settle down, I still have more to tell you, Tsunade said, getting him to calm back down. Now, as you just said, your father the fourth Hokage defeated the nine-tailed fox and saved the village, she said, causing him to nod. The thing is, that is not exactly true, she said, causing his eyes to widen slightly. The nine-tailed fox is a tailed beast, a creature made up entirely of chakra, she said while looking at her grandson. There is no way to truly kill a tailed beast. The only way to defeat it is to seal the beast into a human baby, she said before pausing and looked at Naruto. Seal it inside of a baby? He asked, causing her to nod her head. That's right, Tsunade replied with a nod. People with tailed beasts sealed inside of them are called Jinchurikis. Your mother was the previous Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails and my grandmother before that, she said, surprising Naruto once more. My mom had the nine tails inside of her? He asked in an astonished voice. Then who has the fox in them now? He asked while tilting his head to the side. I'm getting to that, Tsunade said, trying to ease him into it as much as she can. In order to defeat the giant fox and save the village, your father had to use a very powerful jutsu to seal the fox away in a newborn baby. However, the price for him using that jutsu was him dying after using it, she said, making Naruto slightly sad and proud at the same time. Your dad was an exceedingly kind person. He could never bring himself to ask someone else to give up their child to have the fox sealed into. It was something he could only do to his own child, she said, causing Naruto's eyes to widen in shock. Why you mean, I have the giant fox sealed inside of me? He asked, sounding slightly scared. He then lifted up his shirt and started poking his belly. Are you sure he is in there? He asked, causing the adults to chuckle at his antics. Yes, it is in there, Tsunade replied with a smile. Now I want you to understand something, Naruto, she said seriously, getting his attention. You are a Jinchuriki and some people are going to treat you differently because of it, she said, confusing Naruto. There are people out there who believe that Jinchurikis are the tailed beasts themselves in human form and they are typically afraid of them. So Jinchurikis are usually met with a lot of hate and hostilities, she said, causing him to look down slightly. So, people are going to hate me? He asked as tears began to well up in his eyes. Does that mean Grandma, Big Sister, and Pervy Sage are going to hate me too? He asked with tears streaming down his face, causing their eyes to widen. Of course not, sweetie, Tsunade said as she wrapped him in a hug. We will never hate you no matter what you do, she added. You are my cute little brother. It is impossible for me to hate you, Shizune said as he ruffled his hair. We will never hate you, Squirt, Jiraiya said while also ruffling his hair. Then I don't care who hates me, Naruto said as he wiped the tears from his eyes. As long as you guys don't hate him, I don't care about anyone else, he added between sniffs. One day I'm going to be super strong like Dad and Grandpa Hashi, and then everyone will have to like me, he declared boldly. That's the spirit, kid, Jiraiya said with a smile. Well then, how about we start your shinobi training then? Tsunade asked with a smirk, causing Naruto's eyes to widen in excitement. You mean that it is time for me to unlock my chakra? He asked in an overly excited tone as he started bouncing up and down on his grandmother's lap. He had wanted to unlock his chakra a year ago when he saw his big sister walking up the side of one of the trees in the backyard. He thought it was so cool. That's right, Squirt, Jiraiya said with a grin on his face. But before that, I have something for you, he said, confusing Naruto. He had already received a gift from the old pervert, so he was wondering what else the man had for him. Jiraiya reached into his robe and pulled out a small storage scroll. He then channeled some chakra into the scroll, causing a puff of smoke to appear. When the smoke disappeared, Jiraiya was holding a small picture frame. "Here," he said as he handed it to Naruto. Looking at the picture his godfather handed him, Naruto saw that there were 5 people in the picture. It was a picture of his grandmother, big sister, and godfather standing next to a man with spiky blonde hair and a pregnant red-haired woman. "This is your dad," Jiraiya said while pointing to the blonde-haired man. "This is your mom," he said as he moved his finger over to the red-haired woman. "And that you in there," he said while pointing at the woman's pregnant belly. "These are my parents," he asked as he stared at the picture, causing everyone to nod their heads. "Can I keep this?" he asked as he turned around to look at Jiraiya, who nodded his head. Naruto smiled before he hugged the picture frame tightly into his chest. "Why don't you go put that in your room and let's go to the backyard to unlock your chakra?" his grandmother said, causing him to nod his head eagerly before he climbed down from her lap and ran upstairs to his room. He placed the picture down on the nightstand next to his bed and looked at it for a few moments and smiled. "I'm going to make you guys proud," he said to the picture of his parents before he ran back out the room and down the stairs. When he got downstairs, he saw that his family was already in the backyard waiting for him. Not wanting to wait any longer, he dashed out the back door to the backyard where his grandmother and big sister were standing. They were in the exact center of the backyard waiting for Naruto. Jiraiya was standing there with a small square paper with a seal drawn onto it in his hands. It was a chakra-suppressing seal. He had it mainly as a precaution in case the Nine Tails decided to try and break free. He doubted whether the fox could break out of the seal but wanted to be prepared just in case. "Okay, Naruto," Tsunade said as she saw her grandson join them in the backyard. "Sit down on the ground as though you are meditating," she said while pointing to the ground in front of her. Naruto nodded his head, did his grandmother instructed. "Now close your eyes and meditate," she said, causing him to close his eyes and take a few deep breaths. "Look deep inside yourself for your chakra. It should give off a warm, welcoming feeling," she added. "I feel it," Naruto replied after a few minutes of searching. "Good, now reach out and grab it and pull it towards you," she said, remembering her sensei told her to do the exact same time. The 3 adults watched as Naruto suddenly stretched out his arms before he started grabbing at the air. This action by the little boy caused Shizune to giggle while the 2 other adults' sweat dropped. "I can't hold it," Naruto replied after grabbing the air for a while. "We didn't mean try grabbing it with your hand, dummy," Jiraiya yelled out, causing Naruto to open his eyes and look at the man. "Then how am I supposed to grab it if not with my arms, you pervy sage?" Naruto yelled back before pouting cutely. "Naruto, try to pull it towards you with your mind," Shizune said with an amused smile on her face. "Okay, I'll try," Naruto replied before he closed his eyes and tried again. When he found the warm, welcoming feeling deep inside himself, he began focusing on it, trying to pull it closer to him with his mind. Soon, he could feel the energy getting closer and closer to him. Then suddenly heard some inside of him break, causing all the warm energy to rush throughout his body. He felt a warm sensation spread throughout his entire body. Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Shizune were looking at Naruto as all 3 of them sensed chakra spreading throughout his body. Soon Naruto was surrounded by light green chakra outlining his body. "He has as much chakra as an average genin," Tsunade commented in surprise, seeing a 5-year-old with that much chakra. "Well, that is likely due to him being both a Jinchuriki and an Uzumaki," Jiraiya replied. Tsunade was about to say something else, but before she could speak, they all felt the ground tremble beneath their feet, causing them to put up their guard. What happened next took everyone by surprise. Bursting out from the ground behind Naruto was a decent-sized tree about a foot wide. The tree grew about 6 feet before branches with leaves started to grow out of the rather small trunk. Naruto then opened his eyes, feeling super powerful due to him experiencing chakra for the first time. He looked down at his hand and made a fist, fully enjoying the feeling of power. "Man, I feel so powerful," he said in a happy tone as he began to stand up. "I feel like I could owie," he cried out as he banged his head against one of the branches of the tree as he stood up. "Who put a tree there?" he shouted as he turned and looked at his family, who were all staring at him as though he grew a second head. "What?" he asked as he was kind of creeped out by the way they were all looking at him. "Jiraiya, that's," Tsunade said with her eyes wide as dinner plates and her mouth hung open. "Yeah," Jiraiya replied with an equally astonished look on his face. "Grandfathers," Tsunade said. "Sure is," Jiraiya replied with a nod. "Amazing," Shizune whispered out, staring at the tree. "Are you guys okay?" Naruto asked, knocking them out of their stupor. "Do you have any idea what you just did, brat?" Jiraiya asked as he walked forward and began examining the small tree. "I just unlocked my chakra," Naruto replied, wondering why the old man was fussing over a tree. "And what's up with that tree? It wasn't there before," he asked as he turned and looked at his grandmother. "Naruto, sweetie," Tsunade began as she walked over and knelt down in front of Naruto. "It would appear as though when you unlocked your chakra you unlocked your bloodline as well," she said, causing him to tilt his head to the side cutely. "What's a bloodline?" he asked, making Tsunade recall the fact that they had not gotten to that part of his studies as yet. "Bloodlines are special abilities passed down genetically within specific clans," she explained as best she could to a 5-year-old. "It is like the Uchiha clan's Sharingan or your great-great-grandfather's would release," she said, causing his eyes to light up in excitement. "You mean I have some kind of special powers?" he asked with a large, excited grin on his face, causing his grandmother to smile slightly. "Yes, it would appear as though you have somehow inherited your great-great-grandfather's would release," she said with a sigh. He. "I told you I'm going to be as cool as Grandpa Hashi," Naruto said with a wide grin as he turned to look at the tree. "Lady Tsunade," Shizune called out, getting her teacher's attention. "How come Naruto has the first Hokage's bloodline when no one else in the Senju clan has ever awakened it?" She asked the question that was actually in both Jiraiya and Tsunade's minds. "I haven't the slightest clue, Shizune," she replied before turning her attention back to Naruto. "And I don't have any of our medical equipment here for us to study a sample of his DNA to see just what is different between his and mine," she stated. "For now, let's just focus on his training and worry about all that later," Jiraiya said as he stopped studying the tree and turned to Tsunade. As he said that, a thought suddenly struck Tsunade, causing her eyes to widen. "We don't have any of grandfather's wood jutsus here," she said as she stared at Jiraiya. "They are all locked away in the Senju clan compound," she stated, causing her old teammate to sigh. "Can't I just go get them?" he asked with a puzzled look on his face, to which she shook her head no. "No, the compound is currently locked behind some pretty complex security seals that Grandma Mito brought with her from the Uzumaki clan. Only those with Senju blood and chakra can unlock it," she stated. "What if you give me some of your blood and store some of your chakras in a special seal?" Jiraiya suggested, causing Tsunade to shake her head no once more. No, Grandma Mito had planned for someone attempting that in advance. "In addition to Senju blood and chakra, you need to plus the chakra in a specific pattern to unlock the seals," she said with a sigh, amazing Jiraiya. "Well, for now, let us just teach him what we can," Jiraiya said as he folded his arms. "Whenever either you or he decide to go back to Leaf, he can learn his wood release then," he added, causing her to nod her head. She was not ready to return right now because Naruto was not able to defend himself as yet. Maybe when he can properly defend himself, he can go back, she thought to herself. Oi! Naruto shouted, getting their attention. Are you guys going to train me now? He asked, getting tired of waiting. Sure. Things squirt, Jiraiya replied before reaching up and plucking 2 of the leaves off the tree and handed one to Naruto. The first thing you need to learn how to do is to make this leaf stick to your forehead using chakra, he said as he placed his leaf on his forehead and channeled some chakra to the spot where the leaf is, making it stick in place. Naruto saw what his godfather did and tried to duplicate it, but much to his annoyance it would not stay on his forehead. Knowing that will take him a while to get it to stick, especially with his level of chakra, the 3 adults decided to go sit down on some of the chairs that they had in the backyard and watch him. **** 1 week later. It took Naruto 2 days to figure out how to get the leaf to stick to his forehead and stay there. For the remaining 5 days his grandmother had him focusing on sticking multiple leaves all over his body at the same time as a better way to increase his control. Jiraiya had stayed for a few days before leaving to tell the Hokage about Naruto unlocking his chakra. Both Tsunade and Jiraiya had agreed that they should keep Naruto's bloodline a secret from the Hokage for now, mainly due to the fact that they did not want to risk someone overhearing that kind of information. Seeing as how Naruto had mastered the leaf balancing exercise, Tsunade thinks it is time she taught him the tree climbing exercise. Naruto, who was currently sitting under the tree next to the koi pond with 3 leaves stuck to his forehead, one on either cheek and one in the center of his chest, saw his grandmother walking towards him. His big sister was sitting under the other tree reading book on medical ninjutsu. Naruto, it is time for you to learn the next exercise, Tsunade said, getting Naruto excited. I'm going to teach you how to walk up the side of a tree, she said before she moved him out of the way. She then placed on foot on the trunk of the tree and began walking up the tree as though she was walking on the ground. Wow, Naruto said as he started bouncing up and down. That's so cool, he added with stars in his eyes. Tsunade chuckled at her grandson's behavior before hopping down from the tree. All you have to do is channel some chakra to the bottom of your feet and walk up, she said as she moved out of the way for him to try. Naruto did as his grandma said before placing one foot onto the tree trunk. As he tried to place the other foot on the tree, he fell down flat on his behind, causing his grandmother and big sister to laugh at him. Keep trying, Tsunade said before she left to check on Shizune's studies. 2 weeks later, it had taken Naruto about 4 days to complete the tree walking exercise, and similarly to when he completed the leaf balancing exercise, his grandmother made him spend the remaining of the week running up and down the tree to build up his reserve and better his control. Once that week had passed, Tsunade made him spend an extra week running up and down the tree while balancing leaves and pebbles on his forehead and body to better his control. For the boy who was always filled with energy, at the end of every day, he would be completely tired. Currently, everyone was inside the house. Tsunade had decided to give Naruto a day to relax before she really kicks his training into gear. Tsunade was in the kitchen doing the dishes while Shizune was standing behind her staring at Naruto with her mouth open. Lady Tsunade, Shizune said, getting their sensei's attention. Do you think it was a good idea teaching Naruto how to walk up trees? She asked, confusing her sensei. What do you mean if it was a good idea? Tsunade asked as she continued to wash the dishes. It is a necessary skill to learn for every shinobi, she added. I know that, I'm just wondering if you are regretting teaching him it. She asked, causing Tsunade to scrunch up her forehead in confusion. Why would I she began as she turned around to question Shizune. As she turned around, she saw Naruto running up and down the walls and all over the ceiling with a wide smile on his face as he left a trail of shoe prints behind him. Tsunade's eyebrows started to twitch violently before she shouted out, Naruto, ooh, she yelled. Time skip. 7 years later. 7 years had passed since Naruto unlocked his chakra and discovered that he had inherited his great-great-grandfather's bloodline. Naruto had advanced leaps and bounds in the last 7 years. He had as close to perfect chakra control as he could possibly get thanks to his grandmother and big sister putting him through the ringer when it comes to chakra control exercise. Immediately after mastering the walking on water exercise, his mother put him through some more advanced chakra control exercises that are usually taught to those who want to learn medical ninjutsu. As a result of his close to perfect chakra control, his grandmother and big sister trained him in medical ninjutsu. When his chakra reserve had increased to a sizable amount, Tsunade decided to teach him the shadow clone jutsu to help speed up his training a bit. To say that by creating a few clones every day and having them train alongside Naruto sped up his training would be an understatement. Even though Naruto had the chakra necessary for him to create hundreds of shadow clones at any given time, Tsunade limited him to no more than 20 clones at a time. That way they all could train in the compound and not get in each other's way and also avoid Naruto suffering serious backlash from them dispelling. So, every day for the past 5 years Naruto would make about 15 clones, 5 of them read books and scrolls about medical ninjutsu, another 5 would read a few books on fuinjutsu which Jiraiya would bring for him, and the remaining 5 would train with the original and Tsunade in either taijutsu or ninjutsu. Once the clones ran out of reading material Naruto instructed them to train in his chakra nature. It was the first thing Tsunade and Jiraiya checked after he had completed his water walking exercise. As it turns out Naruto had an affinity for 3 chakra natures, with the wind nature being his main type while water and earth being secondary. Tsunade and Jiraiya had expected the earth and water but the wind was a complete surprise to them. Thanks to his clones Naruto had already done the necessary exercise to better control each of the 3 chakra natures but he was not pleased with that, he wanted to take it to the next step to better his control over each chakra nature. Over the past 7 years, Naruto found time in between all of his training that his family put him through to practice his wood release. Even though he did not have his great-great-grandfather's scrolls and techniques with him, he would like to believe that his control over his wood release is fantastic but unfortunately, there is no way for him to truly tell until he sees his great-great-grandfather's scrolls. His grandmother would often tell him that he reminded her of her grandfather when she would watch him create trees and all kinds of wooden constructs. Even though he did not have his great-great-grandfather's scrolls, it did not stop Naruto's imagination from aiding him in creating a few techniques for him to use. Now Naruto was 12 years old and he was a competent medic, a seals master that could give Jiraiya a run for his money, and a pretty powerful shinobi that could kick an average Jonins. Well, technically he was not a shinobi as yet due to the fact that he has not taken the graduation exam as yet. Currently, Naruto was standing inside of his bedroom looking around at the now empty room. He had packed up all of his things barring the bed to take with him to the Hidden Leaf village. His grandmother had decided that it was time for him to return to the village so that he can take the graduation exam with people who were his age. Apparently, she had already sent word to the Hokage that he will be returning and the Hokage agreed to let Naruto take the graduation exam even though he has never stepped foot into the academy. I sure am going to miss this place, Naruto said to himself with a smile as he looked around all the memories he had there. At 12 years old he now stood 5 feet 6 taller than anyone his age. His spiky blonde hair had gotten longer over the years to the point where it was exactly like his father's. He was wearing black shinobi pants with a matching pair of black shinobi sandals. He wore a black uniform jacket with orange buttons going down the middle and on the end of the sleeves. Around his right bicep was a red armband with kanji for 9. On it and on the back of the uniform jacket was the Senju clan symbol in orange. He had the top 2 buttons of his jacket opened revealing his great-great-grandfather's necklace which his mother gave to him. It basically his outfit from the last Naruto the movie, the only difference is the pants are black and the Senju clan symbol on his back. Are you done yet, brat? Came the voice of Tsunade knocking him out his reminiscing. I'm coming, Naruto replied with a smile before walked out of his room and closed the door. He then made his way downstairs and to see his big sister and his grandmother waiting for him there. Do you have everything? Tsunade asked as she looked at him with one hand on her hip. Yes, everything is stored in the storage scrolls and the storage scrolls are stored in the storage seal on my wrist, he said as he pulled up his right sleeve revealing a storage seal tattoo on his wrist. Good, Sarutobi-sensei is expecting you, she said causing him to nod his head. Tsunade and Shizune were not going with him to the Leaf Village instead, they are going to be touring around the Fire Country for a bit before they make their way to the village. It was mainly due to them being cooped up in the Fire Capital for the past 12 years with 7 of those 12 years was spent training Naruto into the ground. If anything, they deserved a short break. I'll be there, he replied with a smile. The Chunin exams are going to be held in the Leaf this year. We will arrive there a few days before the finals, she said causing Naruto to fold his arms across his chest before he spoke. Are you going to be coming to Leaf to see me or are you just going cause that's where all the gambling happening? He asked with a small pout causing Shizune to giggle at her brother's behavior. Tsunade on the other hand had a different reaction, she punched him right in the face sending him flying back into the stairs destroying it in the process. Care to repeat that question, brat? Tsunade asked threateningly. You know with me no longer around, Naruto began as he pulled himself from the rubble of the stairs and dusted himself off. I wonder who is going to fix all of your messes, he said before channeling some chakra into his foot and stomping it on the ground. As soon as he did that, wooden beams broke through the floor and formed a new flight of stairs to replace the old one. With you gone I won't have a reason to be making any mess, Tsunade retorted with a smirk on her face. Oh, you know you are going to miss me, Naruto said as he walked up to his grandmother. She smiled at him before pulling him into a warm hug. Be safe, she whispered while hugging him and fighting back tears at the same time. I will, Naruto replied as he broke the hug and turned to his big sister who already had tears streaming down her face. I'm going to miss you, Naru, she said as latched onto Naruto. Big sis, you're acting as though you're not going to see me again, Naruto said as he tried to comfort his sister. I know, she said as she let go of him and wiped away her tears. Good, now where is Taunton? He asked as he began looking around for Shizune's pet pig that she got 2 years ago. Oink, squealed the little pig as she ran out of the itching towards the living room after hearing her name being called. Now Taunton, I am leaving both of them in your care. Try to keep them out of trouble, he said as he knelt down petted the pig's head. Oink, the pig replied while pointing her snout up in the girl causing Naruto to smile. Good, he said before he stood up and pulled both Shizune and Tsunade in for one final hug. I should head out now, he said as he let them go. Send us a message when you get there and try to stay out of trouble, Tsunade said causing him to grin. I always stay out of trouble, he replied as he made his way to the door causing the two women to sweat drop. They walked up behind him as he exited the door and stood in the doorway as they watched him leave the compound. Is he going to be okay? Shizune asked as she stared at Naruto walking away. I think the question you should be asking is if the village is going to be okay, Tsunade said with a chuckle knowing her grandson's tendencies. Naruto was taking in the scenery of the streets of the capital as he walked by. This was the first time he was walking outside the compound without either his big sister or his grandmother with him. Smiling to himself he placed both of his hands in his pocket continue making his way to the main entrance of the capital. It took about 15 minutes for him to get to the main entrance considering he was simply walking and taking in the sights. When he reached the gate entrance, he saw that there were 2 samurai guards standing on either side of the entrance guarding it. When the guards saw him approaching, they stood at attention. They were quite familiar with who Naruto was due to the fact that Tsunade, Shizune, and he would frequently visit the Fire Lord and his wife at the palace. "Greetings, Lord Senju," both guards said simultaneously, causing Naruto to nod his head and wave at them as he walked out of the entrance. He was quite accustomed to people calling him Lord Senju by now, after the guards and palace servants would do it every time he visited there. His grandmother told him to get used to it because it was what people would be calling him back at the Leaf. Naruto took 3 steps outside of the capital before he stopped and stared at the lush forest ahead of him. It was at that moment he recalled something. He had not the slightest clue how to get to the Leaf Village. Deciding to ask one of the guards, he turned around and spoke to them. "Can either one of you tell me how to get to the Leaf Village?" he asked as he looked at them. The guards looked at each other for a second before the one on the right spoke up. "It is directly south of the capital," he said while looking at Naruto. "It is about a 2 to 3 days journey from here depending on your speed," he said, causing Naruto to nod his head before he spoke. "Thank you," Naruto said before he turned and started walking south. This was the first time he was outside of the capital. He was going to take his time and truly soak in the scenery around him. He walked through the forest for about 5 hours before his stomach started grumbling. "Guess it's time for lunch," he said as he stopped and began looking around to find a place for him to eat. Soon the sound of running water invaded his ear, causing him to turn his attention to the left and began walking in the direction of the sound. He walked for about 5 minutes before coming to the edge of a riverbank. "This is a nice place to eat," he said before he plopped himself down on the grass at the edge of the bank and flicked his wrist, activating the storage seal. 1 second later, with a puff of smoke, Naruto was revealed holding a small storage scroll in his hand. He opened the scroll and placed it down in front of him before he sent some chakra into the seal, creating another puff of smoke. The only difference was when the smoke disappeared this time 2 large bowls of ramen were in front of Naruto, still piping hot. "Got to love storage seals," he thought to himself as he picked up a pair of chopsticks and one of the bowls before digging in. It took him 5 minutes to finish both bowls of ramen, and by Naruto standards that was him taking his time. After he finished, he resealed the empty bowls into the storage seals and then stood up, turned around, and began making his way back from where he came from. He walked for a couple of minutes before he stopped and looked to the right, then the left, then in front of him, and then behind him. "I have no idea which direction I came from and which direction I'm supposed to be going in," Naruto said to himself as he looked around him. Everything looked the same to him and he was fairly sure he was not where he started before making his way to the riverbank. "Well, this," he said with a sigh as he ran his hand through his hair. "I'm pretty sure I came from over there," he said while pointing to the right. "And I am supposed to be heading south, which is in that direction. I think," he said while pointing to the left. "Oh well, life is just one big adventure, I guess," he said with a shrug before he started heading to the left. He walked for about 2 hours before he exited the forest and joined a dirt road that seems to cut through the forest. 2 days later, it was currently nightfall, and Naruto was standing in the forest in the middle of a forest still yet to reach the Hidden Leaf Village, and he was starting to get frustrated. The dirt road that he was previously on led him to Tanzaku quarters. He was so caught up in admiring the scenery around him that he did not notice the road he was on twisted and turned in all directions, leading off the course he was supposed to be on. After spending a night in Tanzaku quarters, he set out at full speed this time for the Leaf Village after getting some direction from the lady at the inn that he stayed the night in. However, even at full speed, she told him it would still take him 2 days. It had been 3 days since he left the capital, and he knew the Hokage was expecting him in the village. If he did not arrive there soon, he was sure the man would send out a search party for him, thinking the worst had happened. Naruto could not allow that to happen, it would be too embarrassing. I am starting to believe that they don't call these villages hidden villages for no reason, he said as he sighed and resumed walking through the forest. He took about 5 steps before coming to a halt and narrowing his eyes. He can sense 2 people's chakra signature fluctuating some distance to the right of him and could hear the faint sounds of metal hitting against metal. It was clear to him that someone was fighting over in that direction. Letting curiosity get the better of him, Naruto placed both of his hands in his pocket and took on a serious look on his face before calmly walking in the direction of the 2 chakra signatures. He knew he would mind his own business, but given the fact that he knew he was somewhat pretty close to the Leaf Village, he decided to check to see if it is a Leaf Shinobi engaging some enemy shinobi. Judging from their chakra, he can tell that it was 2 Chunins, so he was not worried about himself being in any kind of danger. When he carried to the location where he had sensed the fighting taking place, he saw Chunins from the Leaf Village fighting each other, and by the looks of it, they were not sparring. Looking on from behind one of the trees, it was quite clear that one of the 2 was clearly outmatched judging by the number of wounds present on his body, while the other had some but still far fewer injuries. The thing, however, that Naruto took note of was the fact that the one with the least number of injuries was carrying a scroll that Naruto thought was oddly familiar. If I am not mistaken, that is great-great-grandfather's scroll of sealing, or otherwise known as the Forbidden Scroll, he noted as he stared at the scroll. It would appear as though one if not both of them stole the scroll, he hypothesized as he observed the 2 Chunins. Deciding that it was time to make himself known and have some fun, he walked out from behind the trees whistling with a carefree expression on his face as he strolled up to the 2 Chunins, getting their attention. My, what do we have here? Naruto asked in a carefree manner, causing the 2 Chunins to be on guard. 2 Chunins from the Leaf Village trying to kill each other, he noted with a disappointed shake of his head. Very unbecoming of comrades, he mocked before turning his attention to the scroll. And would you look at this, the Forbidden Scroll as well, he said in a fake shocked voice. I guess there is a traitor, or maybe even traitors, in our midst, he said as he looked between the 2 of them. What to do? He asked in a carefree tone, putting the 2 men on edge. Who the hell are you, kid? Yelled the one carrying the scroll, getting Naruto's attention. Me, Naruto asked while pointing to himself. I'm just a passerby who got lost on his way to Leaf Village, he said with a shake of his head before his face brightened up a bit. You 2 wouldn't mind escorting me to the village, would you? He asked as he looked at them with a fake hopeful look on his face. Naruto's carefree attitude about the whole situation was really putting the 2 men on edge. What are you doing? Shouted the one who was more injured. Run before he kills you, he yelled. In Iruka's mind, that was just a boy in front of them, a boy who was about to get himself killed. Hearing Iruka warning the boy, Mizuki gained some confidence, seeing Iruka worried about the boy's safety. It made him believe that Iruka thought that he could easily kill the boy. Too late for that, boy, Mizuki said with a murderous look in his eye. I'm going to kill you, then kill Iruka and make my escape to Lord Orochimaru. He yelled out with a crazy look on his face as though he had gone mad. Soon, very soon, I'll have all the power in the world. Ha 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 ha, he said before finishing with a maniacal laugh. I'm sorry, but I am afraid that I am still going to need you to escort me to the village, Naruto said before the grin on his face disappeared and was replaced with a dangerous look on his face. And you are going to by force if necessary, he added as he flared his chakra, causing his body to be surrounded by a green outline and the pressure in the surrounding area to increase. Mizuki and Iruka's eyes widened in shock at the amount of chakra that was being released by the boy in front of them. Just who the hell are you? Mizuki asked, shouted with fear ever so present in his voice. Naruto stared at him, made a single hand seal and spoke. Wood style. Wood binding jutsu, he said in a low voice while holding the snake hand seal. As he said that, a large tree branch with leaves on it burst out from the ground under Mizuki's feet and coiled its way around the Chunin, binding him in place. It happened so fast that the Chunin could not react fast enough to escape. Naruto then narrowed his eyes before he added a bit more chakra, causing the tree branch to tighten its grip on Mizuki. Ah! Mizuki yelled out in pain as he felt the coil get tighter. Please, let me go and I promise I won't cause you any trouble, I swear, Mizuki begged with tears streaming down his face, causing Naruto to chuckle darkly at him. No, I don't think so, Naruto replied as he let go of the hand seal and began walking towards the duo. I've heard wonders of the Hidden Leaf's torture and interrogation division headed by a man called Ibiki, Naruto said, causing the color to drain from the traitorous Chunin's face. I think I will let him deal with you, he said with a smirk before walking over to Iruka, causing the injured Chunin to break out from his shock of seeing the first Hokage's bloodline. Do not panic, I am just going to heal your wounds, Naruto said as he knelt down beside Iruka and began healing the shinobi with medical ninjutsu. Thank you, Iruka said with a grateful smile on his face. Naruto nodded his head and just continued to heal him. While healing Iruka, Naruto created 2 shadow clones without using a single hand seal. One clone went over and picked up the forbidden scroll and brought it over to Naruto, while the other went over and severed the bottom on the tree branch that was binding Mizuki so that they could transport him. Upon severing the branch, Mizuki fell over while still bounded, hitting his head pretty hard against the ground, knocking him out. After he finished healing Iruka, Naruto stood up and picked up the forbidden scroll. Iruka was about to say something to him about the scroll, but before he could, a tree branch similar to the one binding Mizuki burst up from the ground and wrapped itself around him as well. What is the meaning of this? Iruka yelled, asked. It's nothing personal, it's just a precaution, Naruto said with a shrug. For all I know, the two of you are in on this together and he betrayed you, he said while creating 2 more shadow clones to carry Iruka while the 2 from earlier would carry Mizuki. When we get to the village, the Hokage will decide if you are innocent or not, he added before signaling the clone to pick them up. Which direction is the village in? He then asked while looking at Iruka. Straight ahead, Iruka replied, causing Naruto to nod his head before he began walking in the direction of the village with his 4 clones carrying the 2 Chunins behind him. He walked in silence for about 15 minutes before the village walls came into view. Naruto could not help but smile at the fact that he had finally arrived at the village. So, this is the Hidden Leaf village, he said as they approached the entrance. As they were approaching the entrance, about 6 shinobis, all ranging from Chunin to Jonin, appeared in front of the gate ready to confront Naruto. Naruto was not really all that worried about the 6 of them. He continued walking towards the gate without a care in the world. Halt and identify yourself, a Jonin wearing dark sunglasses ordered. Who the hell wears sunglasses at night? Naruto asked in a confused tone as he continued to walk towards them. The sunglass-wearing Jonin was named Ebisu, and he was slightly ticked off that the kid carrying the forbidden scroll just ignored his order. I said halt and identify yourself. Ebisu repeated a bit louder this time. Oh right, I'm Naruto. Naruto said with a carefree smile on his face as he stopped in front of the group. Can all of you move out of the way? I got an appointment with the Hokage that I am a few days late for. It would be incredibly impolite to keep him waiting for any longer, he said with a smile. The 6 shinobi all looked at each other, unsure what to do. And what business do you have with the Hokage, brat? One of the Chunin asked. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware that the Hokage's business was any of your business, Naruto replied with the carefree smile still on his face. The Chunin who had asked the question growled when he heard Naruto's reply. Just who the hell does this little brat think he is? He thought to himself in anger. Now all of you have 2 options here. You can either escort me to the Hokage, he said with a smile before wiping the smile from his face and replacing it with a serious look as he narrowed his eyes and flared his chakra slightly. Or get the hell out of my way, he said lowly, causing some of the Chunins to take a step back, including the one who spoke up earlier. We will escort you to Lord Hokage, another Jonin said, getting everyone's attention. Naruto looked over at him and saw that he had a Senbon needle in his mouth. Naruto smiled at him and suppressed his chakra once more. The group of shinobi then escorted Naruto to a large red building with fire written on the front. In front of the building were even more Chunins and Jonins, and standing behind them all was an old man wearing a white robe. Lord Hokage. This boy approached the southern gate with the forbidden scroll in hand along with Mizuki and Iruka as his captives, Ebisu yelled out, getting everyone's attention. He claims to have an appointment with you, he added, causing the Hokage to raise an eyebrow and walked to the front of the group of shinobi to see who had an appointment with him. When he got to the front of the group, he gasped in shock at the boy standing before him. It was as though he was staring at a younger version of the fourth Hokage. It was not until he saw the whisker marks on each cheek did he realize just who it was. Naruto. The Hokage called out in a slightly surprised voice. Hello, Lord Hokage, Naruto said respectfully with a smile. Sorry I'm a bit late, I kind of got lost on the way here, he said with an embarrassing chuckle. Well, you are here now, the third Hokage said before he looked behind Naruto at a bounded Mizuki and Iruka. Can you explain what happened with them? He asked, completely not noticing the fact that they were bounded by trees. Sure, Naruto replied with a smile. While I was heading here, I came upon these two trying to kill each other in the woods. The unconscious one was in possession of the scroll while the other one was getting the living hell beat out of him, he said, causing Iruka to look away in embarrassment. Long story short, I captured both of them and took the scroll because I didn't know if one of them stole it or both of them stole it and one betrayed the other, Naruto said with a nonchalant shrug. Oh, here, he said before handing the scroll over to the Hokage. Mizuki was the only one who stole the scroll, the Hokage said while looking at the still unconscious Chunin. Iruka was part of the search party that I sent out to retrieve the scroll, he added as he turned to the academy instructor. Nodding to the Hokage, Naruto signaled the clone to set Iruka free. Take the thief to Ibiki. The Hokage ordered the shinobi around before turning back to Naruto. Let us go to my office, Naruto, he said before turning and walking towards the giant red building while holding onto the forbidden scroll. Naruto dispelled his clones before following the Hokage to his office, leaving the shinobi behind to deal with the scroll thief. Just who is that boy? One of the shinobi asked as he stared at Naruto walking away. How the hell did he bind Mizuki with a tree? Another asked, drawing attention to the fact the traitor had a tree branch wrapped around him. Guys, a random Chunin stuttered out. Is that symbol on the back of his shirt what I think it is? He asked while pointing to Naruto's back. Everyone looked over to Naruto and saw the Senju clan's crest on his back, causing their eyes to widen. The Senju clan, one of them whispered out in shock. It was at that moment a few of the smarter ones began looking between Naruto and the tree branch that was binding Mizuki. Impossible, one said in a whisper. The first Hokages would release, another said before he turned and looked at Iruka as if to ask if it was true. Yes, you are correct, Iruka replied, getting everyone to look at him. He possesses the bloodline of the first Hokage, he said, causing everyone's jaws to drop. Hokage's office. As they entered the office, the Hokage went to sit behind his desk, but then he remembered that the chair, which is usually on the opposite side of his desk, had been sent out to be replaced that afternoon and a new one would not arrive until the next day. I'm sorry, but the chair which usually there was sent out to be replaced, he said as he looked at Naruto with an apologetic look on his face. It is fine, Naruto said with a wave of his hand before he stomped his foot on the ground, causing a few small beams of wood to sprout up. In a matter of seconds, a new chair made out of wood was there for him to sit on. Wonderful, the Hokage said as both he and Naruto sat down. The Hokage sat down and blinked for a few seconds as he stared at Naruto, who was grinning at him. His eyes then widened to the size of dinner plates before he sprung up back to his feet and pointed at Naruto. "Why, you just," he stuttered out in a shocked voice, causing Naruto to burst out laughing. "Grandma was right, people's reaction to my bloodline is hilarious," Naruto said while laughing. The Hokage plopped himself back down on his chair before he let out a sigh. "I'm getting too old for this," he said, causing Naruto to only grin at him. "When did you unlock it?" he asked. "When I was 5, Naruto replied, surprising the old man. "It happened the same time I unlocked my chakra," he said, causing the old Hokage to nod. "It does bring back a lot of memories seeing you use it," he said with a fond smile. "It reminds me of Hashirama-sensei," he said, causing Naruto to grin after being compared to his great-great-grandfather. "Grandma said the same thing," he said with a smile. "I was expecting you 2 days ago, Naruto," the Hokage said as he stared at Naruto. "You missed the graduation exam," he added, causing Naruto's eyes to widen. "What?" Naruto asked. "Does that mean I have to wait till next year?" he asked in a slight panic. "Oh man, Grandma is going to kill me," he said as he sunk into the chair. "No, nothing like that," the Hokage said with a chuckle. "I can give you the test tomorrow," he said, causing Naruto to breathe out a sigh of relief. "However, a lot of the teams have already been decided, so we are going to have to come up with something to do about you," he said, causing Naruto to nod his head. "I would love to hear about how life was for you with Tsunade, but it is pretty late now, and I am sure you must be tired," the Hokage said, causing Naruto to smile and nod his head. He was indeed tired, and he needed a bath as soon as possible. "Tell you what, why don't you come by the Sarutobi compound tomorrow morning for breakfast and you can tell me everything," he added with a grandfatherly smile. "That sounds wonderful," Naruto replied with a smile before he remembered something. "Before I forget," he said as he flicked his wrist and unsealed a small scroll and handed it to the Hokage. "This is a letter from my grandmother appointing me the acting head of the Senju clan until she returns to the village," he said in a serious voice. "When will she be returning?" the Hokage asked. "She said we will arrive here a few days before the finals of the Chunin exams," Naruto replied. "Well then, I should let you go get settled in," the Hokage said as he stood up. "You wouldn't by chance have a map of the village, do you?" Naruto asked, not wanting to get lost again. The third Hokage pulled open one of the grass to his desk and pulled out a map. He then opened it for Naruto. "We are here right now," he said, pointing to the map. "Senju compound is located over here in the clan district," he said while pointing where Naruto needed to go. Naruto looked at it and began plotting his path to take. "Thank you, Lord Hokage," Naruto said with a thankful smile on his face as he folded up the map. "I will see you in the morning," the Hokage said, causing Naruto to nod. "Good night, Lord Hokage," Naruto said before he held up a half-ram seal and shunshin away. Naruto appeared down at the entrance where he left the group of shinobi with Mizuki. There was no one there when he appeared there with the body flicker technique. The streets were completely empty. Naruto looked around at his surroundings for a bit before he opened the map and began making his way to the clan district where the Senju compound was located. It took him 5 minutes to arrive in front of the gates to Senju compound from the Hokage's office. When he arrived there, he could see that there were people still on the streets. Most of them were staring at him. He chalked it up to the fact that he was staring at the gates to the compound. Naruto then walked up to the gate, getting the attention of everyone on the street. Even those who were not looking at him previously now had their eyes on him. He bit his thumb, drawing some blood before swiping it across the seal on the gate. He then pressed his palm over the seal and pulsed his chakra in a specific pattern that his grandmother taught him. Everyone on the street watched in amazement as the sealing array glowed before gates pushed themselves open. Naruto walked through the gates and into the compound, ignoring the people that were on the street trying to get a look inside the famous Senju clan compound. After he entered, he locked the gates behind him and reactivated the seals before making his way to the main house of the compound. The clan compound was rather large. There were enough houses there for a few hundred clan members. When Naruto arrived at the main house, he created about 50 shadow clones and unsealed the storage scrolls with all of his stuff in them and give it to them to put away while he orders a few of them to go explore the house. While all the clones were doing that, Naruto made his way down a hallway that his grandmother told him about and stood in front of a wall. He then bit his finger once more, drawing some more blood, and repeated what he did at the gate. After doing that, a large sealing array appeared on the wall and a door became visible. He opened the door, which leads to a flight of stairs going down. He walked down the stairs and came upon another door, which he did the same thing he did to the previous one, unlocking the security seal which was placed on it. Once it did that, he opened the door and stepped into what his grandmother described as the Senju clan's vault. As he stepped into the room, the lights automatically came on and Naruto could only marvel at the number of weapons, books, and scrolls that were in the room. "Whoa," he said in amazement. It was inside this room that all of his great-great-grandfather's jutsus were locked away in, along with a lot of books, weapons, and scrolls that were spoils of war. As Naruto was looking around, his eye caught a rather large scroll in the corner of the room just next to the door. It was a white scroll with a black and silver lining. He walked up to it and picked it up. "Wonder what this is?" he asked himself before he opened the scroll, and could not help but smirk when he saw what it was. "A summoning contract," he said with a smile before a puzzled expression appeared on his face. "Why are there no names written on it?" he asked as he saw that there was not a single name written on the contract, signifying that there had never been a summoner for this contract. "I wonder what kind of creature this is for," he asked himself before he caught a glimpse at a picture of the animal at the bottom corner of the contract. "Interesting," he said with a smirk.